Marion Pollack. She's been a long time member of Canadian Union of Postal Workers. She's done extensive work around international labor solidarity. She's currently retired. She's not representing any organization at this forum, but she's going to share her experience with us, and we're glad that she's here with us today.
I want to thank you for inviting me, and I also want to recognize that we're on Aboriginal land, because I think it's really important when we talk about international solidarity, we put it in that context. So what I'm going to start doing is give a few personal anecdotes, then give some response to Kim, and then talk about the situation I see that Canadian labour is in terms of international solidarity. I'm not going to approach this from a historical viewpoint of the sins or the work of the Canadian Labour Congress. I think people like Catherine actually have a far stronger handle on that than me. So when Kim was talking, I was reminded about an incident. I was at a meeting, a global meeting of postal workers in Washington, D.C., and there were postal unions from all across, the country, and I was literally being followed by the guys from History. Everywhere I went, they seemed to be, and it was kind of spooky. But so at sort of one point, I had enough of it, so I confronted them, and they talked about the CUPW, the Canadian Postal Workers' position on BDS. And they said, how come our president hadn't gone, accepted their invitations, and they thought he was anti-Semitic. I said, well, we're a little busy right now, we have collective bargaining and some other issues that we're facing. And I said, we're not anti-Semitic, in fact, I'm Jewish. And they said, oh yes, we already know that. So it was actually, quite worrisome, right? That kind of level. And they kept following me. I mean, it was pretty strange. At a certain point in when I was with CUPW, we wanted to have an international conference on bringing in new technology and new work methods into the post office, and we talked to a number of unions, some from Europe, mostly from Europe, and some from Asia, so I was one of the organizers of the conference, and I get a call from History saying, how come you haven't invited us? And so I said, well, I thought, my goodness, you really are watching what we're doing. So I asked, well, do you have, are you bringing in these type of machines? Do you have this kind of sorting processes? And they couldn't answer, and that was the end of that. But I think those are some real important anecdotes. I was reminded of when I was, starting out, and I was active in the Vancouver District Labour Council, which I would say is, one of the historically more progressive labour councils in Canada and Quebec. And we had done a lot of work around international solidarity. We kept getting, having members of the CLC International Affairs Department come and tell us that we were exceeding our role, right? That we could only do, and we said, thank you, very nice talking to you, but, and that was it. But the other thing that I was reminded of is that just, the debates in the early 80s we had in the Canadian Labour Congress conventions on international solidarity. And it was really focused on Cuba and Nicaragua and specific. And, and at many conventions, we managed to get these really bad resolutions referred back, right? But they never had, but then they were buried. But for us, it was a victory in terms of that they just got referred back. And there was a great deal of mobilization from unions all across, across Canada. But I want to say that I think in terms, I think that there have been some really fundamental changes. One of the unions in Canada that has historically not had the most progressive position on international solidarity is the United Steelworkers as a national union. Well, to their national convention in Vancouver last week, they had Adriana Perez as one of their guest speakers, and who is one of the wife of the Cuban Five. And they are actually, I would say, one of the unions that's really spearheading the struggle around the Canadian Five, the Cuban Five. So I think we need to look at that really importantly. And I would disagree with Kim that internationally in the 40s and the 50s and the 30s, the AFL-CIO was doing nothing internationally, because what I would argue is that they were making branch plant unions in Canada throughout that time, and and I think that, and I think that's really, and I think that has informed the CLC and its forerunners' labour policy, and it's also it really informed what unions in Canada have been able to do. I think actually since we've seen for most unions, not all unions, a severing or a changing of the ties with the United States, it's allowed, not good, but much more, different, avenues for international solidarity. But, there was huge constraints, especially, when there was much more U.S. involvement in the labor movement in Canada. And I think it's because, as a Canadian, I mean, I've always been in a Canadian-based union, but we certainly recognize the influence of international unions, and it wasn't necessarily the most positive influence at all. And so I think that's, I just need to put that forward. I also think that there are some really interesting, currently the CLC and some of the unions are doing some pretty interesting work. I think in Colombia, the CLC was one of the people who were opposing, the Canada-Colombia Free Trade Agreement, and I think that was really important, and it was historical. And I think that a number of unions of international or Canadian unions actually have very good relations with the FAD in Mexico, which is the progressive wing of unions in Mexico. That's not to say that it's all progressive, because we know that CLC has projects to normalize relations with in Palestine and things like that. So I don't want to say it's all progressive. So I wanted to talk about the perspective which I start from, which is that during this time of austerity, and I think we have to recognize that we are, that international solidarity is more important than ever, and this is our opportunity. The global forces of ideology which are impeding workers here are the same forces that are impeding workers' rights everywhere, and that's why international solidarity at this point is so critical. Any weakening of these forces internationally is so important to strengthening the global fight back. So that's really important. But I think that the trade union movement needs to combine our bread and butter strategies with broader social, political, and economic campaigns. And if the trade union movement was just based in struggles on workplace struggles, we're bound to lose, because we have to challenge capital's agenda. So I want to talk about it. But I think there are real tensions and there are real pressures around the international solidarity, and I want to focus on that. And I also think that we're in a very new period, that we actually, it's too new really to talk about what's going on. For many years, the Canadian Labour Congress, International Affairs Department, not their International Solidarity Department, but their International Affairs Department, or International Affairs Department, was hugely funded by CEDA, the Canada International Development Agency. They had a partnership agreement. That's gone. There are, and so, who knows what the implications are, but it also means that there are only 2 staff left, at the CLC, but it's very changed. As well as many national unions who had solidarity funds, whether they were run as charities, such as, the Steelworkers Fund or the CAW Fund. There was also some CEDA money with them. And that's gone. I mean, basically, as of April the 1st, all CEDA money has dried up. So it really does change, what can and can't be done. But it also puts a lot more pressure on unions because there is significantly less money to go around. So I do think we need labor internationalism, but I want to talk about some of the challenges and some of the challenges that we have really failed to address. I've been a long-time activist in the Canadian Union of Postal Workers. In the past couple of months, there have been huge and sustained attacks, especially by the Toronto Sun and other newspapers. They challenged CUPW for having the temerity to send people to the World Social Forum in Brazil, where they said the union was associating with quote-unquote terrorists. They attacked an article in a smallly circulated union document about the report on what was happening in Palestine. And unfortunately, the labor movement didn't respond, but neither did the left, and neither did the Progress, the international solidarity activists, right? There was virtually no response. So what has that done? Well, it's not only has it put CUPW out there on a limb, but my goodness, it's really created a chilly environment for other trade unions. Who's going to go and do international solidarity with Palestine? If you see what happened to CUPW, you see the level that the union was excoriated. So I think that the labor movement made a mistake, but I want to say the left in the labor movement and the left outside the labor movement, we made a huge mistake by not addressing it. You don't need a call from CUPW to address that. People could have written letters to the editor. People could have done a whole bunch of things like that, and that didn't happen. So I do think it was a failure, and I think it's a problem failure. But we can't talk about the attacks on CUPW in absence of Harper's agenda, because I think that Harper's agenda directly affects international solidarity. And the first attack I want to see is Bill 377, which is currently being held up in the Senate, but we don't know what it is. Now, Bill 377 is an act to amend the Income Tax Act. And what it requires is all trade unions to report the expenditure of any money over $5,000 and have it on the CRA, the Canadian Revenue Agency's website. Well, so what's that going to do? Well, one, it's going to give right-wing media a bigger reason to attack unions for their international solidarity activity. And it's also going to give members an opportunity to further attack unions for the who are don't support international solidarity or specific avenues of international solidarity, to give them an attack, a reason to attack international solidarity. There's also, it's very rumored that there's an upcoming private members bill that's going to, in terms of federal unions at least, and we see similar things happening in Saskatchewan and in Ontario. Tim Hudak has promised it. Rumors that mandatory union dues deductions are going to be taken away. I was recently this weekend. The reason I'm in Toronto from Lotus Land in British Columbia, as I was at the United Association of Labour Educators, and we were learning a bit about conference. We were learning a bit what's happening in Wisconsin. So much is illegal, right? What you can bargain and what you can do. But in terms of international solidarity specifically, these kind of attacks really put a chilling climate on international solidarity. And we haven't seen, the fight back that we should from the labor movement, but also we haven't seen the fight back we should from progressives within the labor movement and or the left. I want to be, so, in terms of Bill 377. So, but all and the upcoming attack on the mandatory union dues deduction, which is shorthand in Canada is the RAND formula, and the RAND formula was a formula to require every mandatory union dues deduction, but not necessarily union membership. But there's also, which I think is going to be coming down sooner, and this is mere speculation, but I actually I'm pretty, unfortunately, confident it's going to be happening, is that there's a private members bill coming from a Tory. As you know, in terms of private members bill, there's a lottery system in Parliament, and this one now is number 10 in the lottery system, so it's going to come up soon. And if I could remember the Tory member of Parliament, I'd tell you, but sorry. To stop unions from spending union dues money to do any political action. In the last 2 weeks, there was an article there was an advertisement in the Hill Times, and the Hill Times is a magazine that comes out of Ottawa, which is directed to people who work on Parliament Hill. And what it had was, it was all about the Public Service Alliance of Canada. And it had a picture of some of the PSAC people, their flags, it had a picture of students, and it talked about how PSAC was using members' money, and this is from the Merit Foundation, to break up Canada, and union dues should not be allowed that. And it said, PSAC has given money to the Parti Québécois, and that's to break up Canada. Union dues should not be allowed to do that. And then they talked about it's also given money to support the Quebec students movement, which is terrible. Unions should not be allowed to do that. So really clearly, this is coming down the pike. If that comes down the pike, I believe, and I haven't seen the legislation. Tories don't actually show me their private members legislation, but I actually do believe it's gonna make it much more difficult for unions to actually talk about or spend any money on international solidarity. They'll talk about it as political activity. So I think those are some of the things we need to talk about. I also want to talk about the ongoing attacks by governments and employers. Unions are facing huge attacks by government and employers. Over sick leave, pensions, scheduling issues, and just wages and benefits. And so that within the membership, there's increased tension to pay attention to these issues and not quote unquote, we have to deal with I don't know how many times I've heard it, but we have to deal with our own backyard before we deal with people over there. I've heard it and I've heard it and I've heard it. And the federal, the austerity agenda we're facing now is making that worse. So, and then there's but one of the other effects is a decline of union membership. We're seeing, both, in private sector and public sector unions, severe declines in union membership as a result of the austerity agenda. So that's allowing unions to implement their own austerity agendas. And I think that, it's because international solidarity is not embedded, and because of some of the backlash, I think that there are two areas in which unions are cutting back these programs. One is equity, women's issues and things like that. Second is international solidarity. So what we're seeing is, that these sort of level of cutbacks, these level of attacks directly affecting unions' ability to talk about international solidarity. And I think I think we need to talk about that. And also with the increased attacks, and I emphasized it once, but I need to emphasize it, there is huge tension within the members about supporting international solidarity. Members are saying more and more, they want their grievances addressed, they want those kind of issues addressed, rather than sort of talking about international solidarity. In March of this year, or April of this year, the Canadian Labour Congress, the CLC, held a political action conference here. There's about 50, in Toronto, there's about 1,500 people from all across Canada. One of the things the CLC was talking about was improving labor's image. Now, there's a huge wide range of what that meant in that conference. No, but be sure that a lot of the people are really clear that supporting unions in Palestine is not improving labor's image. You know, and I think that kind of stuff is really implicit in those kind of discussions, you know. Maybe supporting unions in Colombia is, you know, is okay, because, you know, trade unions are being killed, and that's not cool, you know. But, but a lot of the other international solidarity activities, they see as not improving labor's image, and so I think that they're going to use, I think that a lot, you know, this whole movement about improving labor's image is really, you know, something that we have to look at. And I also want to talk about, you know, the recent media coverage about the temporary foreign workers program, because I actually think that we missed a huge opportunity. And I think the labor movement was weak, I think the left in the labor movement was weak, and I think international solidarity activists were weak. You know, people talked about how people are coming and stealing our jobs from Canadians. Well, and the real issue is, and I think the issue is, why is the Royal Bank outsourcing, and why are people having to leave their countries, you know, to come to Canada, to, you know, to have decent jobs, and what is the you know, what's the reference in Canada? You know, in Canada, you know, what's happening in Canada in terms of that. But I think the temporary foreign workers program is an issue that international solidarity activists haven't taken up, and we need to take up, because it's totally linked to, you know, to international solidarity. If you don't talk about, you know, bringing people into Canada to use as cheap labor, because, I mean, we know that the TF, you know, the temporary foreign worker agenda is a cheap labor agenda. You know, why is the Royal Bank contracting out IT jobs? Well, they're saying it so clearly. It's cheaper. We save money. So, you know, unless we talk about it in an international solidarity context, we are missing the boat, and, you know, significantly missing the boat. And we did. I didn't hear anything from, you know, labor solidarity activists. I didn't hear, you know, I didn't hear anything very much from the labor movement, and maybe, you know, things, you know, getting over the mountains in BC, you know, maybe it happened and I didn't hear about it, but I didn't. But I think that we really need to sort of, into part of international solidarity, if we don't focus on issues like the temporary foreign workers, we are not doing real international solidarity, and we are not moving the struggle and the agenda forward. And so, you know, and I think we need to criticize. And at this point, you know, even though I've talked about several of my pet peeves, I want to talk about another of my pet peeves. You know, and you know what the hell? I got the floor right now, so which is, you know, I hear international solidarity groups doing wonderful work around Venezuela, around the Bolivarian revolution, around Palestine, around, you know, the Kurds, but I don't hear those same groups talking about what's, you know, coming out and supporting unions on strike or in struggle. And I don't support, you know, and often we don't hear, you know, and maybe this is because I'm in BC, but I don't hear people making those, you know, those links. You know, I come from the Postal Workers Union. When we were on strike, you know, I didn't hear, there were, you know, some international solidarity groups that were really, you know, and we were locked up, that came out and, you know, talked about the links. But I didn't hear it from a lot of people, and I sort of think it's the same issues, the same forces, and I'm not hearing it, you know. And, you know, and maybe, and I'm not saying it's not going on. What I'm saying is it's not going on in enough numbers, and I think that's a real difference. So now I go to the part where I'm not going to be prescriptive, because I mean, I look around this room, I think there are people who know the issues far better than me, and who have a great deal of experience. But I think that we have to talk about, on the shop floor level, what international solidarity is and what we get out of it. You know, we need to talk about this, you know, we need to talk about it, you know, on a very concrete level. We need to talk about the same forces and how we're, you know, and how we're interconnected. We need to talk about what's happening in Colombia and how this come to a workplace near us. You know, one of the avenues, you know, I've used in terms of international solidarity is to talk about what happened to the postal workers in Colombia. You know, the post office was privatized well, to a numbered company, and it happened that one night, it's unclear if it was the army or the paramilitary comes into the post office with guns, tells people to leave, right? You can leave one of two ways, right? walking or not walking. And, you know, and, you know, so we talk about that and how, you know, if it can come to Columbia, what can happen. We talk about what's happening with, you know, privatization and deregulation, you know, post offices around the world and the new technologies, because that directly relates to what's happening on the work floor. And I think people need to, you know, hear that rather than sort of, you know, the general concept of international solidarity, because often that's, you know, very difficult for people to hear. So in terms of that, we need to talk about issues our members can relate to. You know, when we talk about Palestine, you know, I think there are real ways we can frame it. We can talk about water. You know, QP's done a real campaign on water, but I think we need to make, you know, we need to be able to talk about it. You know, we need to talk about how, you know, workers in Canada, mostly, especially white workers, you know, can go, you know, can go, you know, access medical care, can go for coffee where they want, you know, and go to work without being, without having to pass, you know, through hundreds of, you know, not hundreds, but several checkpoints. And I think we need to talk about that in terms of, you know, of people in, you know, in Palestine. I think we need to bring it down to that kind of level, not, you know, because I think that's really, really important. And I think we need to look at different avenues to reach our goal. You know, we've tried for a couple of years to bring, you know, BDS into, you know, the labor movement with boycott, divestment, and sanctions. And, you know, even though, you know, a resolution comes up, you know, a lot of the leaders of the labor movement bury it as quickly as they can. You know, that's really clear. So I think that we need to look at, and it scares people. So I think we need to look at other ways of doing it, like talk about, you know, boycott of, say, SodaStream. Use that as a way to engender discussion, or boycott of Hewlett-Packard. Use those things to engender discussion, you know, rather, you know, and it may, and to bring in those kind of discussions and debates. You know, the Hamilton and District Labor Council talked about a resolution supporting the SodaStream boycott. The Vancouver and District Labor Council has passed a resolution investigating BDS, but they haven't gone any further because, because a whole bunch of internal tensions. But, you know, I'm sure that we could get them to pass a resolution on SodaStream and things like that. You know, and we need to develop, you know, educational materials that can talk to, you know, to activists and the rank and file. And it's got to be like short, you know. Most, it can't be long tomes, and and it's got to, it's got to use, it just be really accessible, you know. I think that it's great that there are, this many people at a meeting on labor imperialism, right? But if I were to put, if I try to talk to CUPW members, or other workers about labor imperialism, they would just like go, huh? What are you talking about, right? So, so we have to actually sort of be able to, to address it in those ways. And we need to talk about, and this is one more of my pet peeves, is that we need to talk about how international solidarity has an intersectional component to it. We need to talk about what's going on with women, in these countries, what's going on with LGBT people in countries. We need to know what's going on with people of color, and we need to, if we're doing delegations, we need to ensure that's going on. That's happening. And I think we need to avoid psychophantism, because I hear it a lot. I know that for a long time in terms of Cuba, and it is that anytime people try to challenge what was going on in Cuba, raise any concerns, you'd be met with sort of variations and much more sophisticated. But Cuba, Cuba's blockaded by the U.S. and it's sort of it's a paradise. And I think we may be able to say, yeah, there are some problems in Cuba, or there are some problems here, or here, but these are the reasons we need to support international solidarity, and be really clear and really really explicit about it. And we also need to talk about as activists and as union leaders, integrate our international solidarity into real, into regular discussions rather than separating it, International solidarity can't be here, and discussions about private, and this is especially for public and private sector unions, but privatization and contracting out there. For me, it's the same thing. And so, if we talk about international solidarity, we need to sort of talk about it together. And we need to talk about, and as international solidarity actors, and as, from the perspective of that, we need to talk about, engage in the fights on Bill 377, the RAND formula and all that. And when one union's under attack for international solidarity, we need to support them. You don't need to wait for a call from the union, for goodness sakes, especially if they're under attack. Their first priority may not be to have a call, to see how to survive, right? Not wait. And we need to, and as I said, we need to sort of talk about, temporary foreign workers, because I do think we sort of miss the bandwagon in terms of that. But I do think that and so now I just want to sort of comment on a bit more of what Kim said. We have experienced, very much similar trends in our unions about McCarthyism in Canada. In the 50s and the 60s, some of the most progressive unions in Canada, United Electrical, the United Fishermen and Allied Workers Union. Mine Mill. Yeah, we're kicked out of the CLC for being quote unquote communists, and clearly there were communists in the leadership, but it was mostly because they were progressive. We also know, that a lot of the labor leaders, I'm thinking of, my very particular favorite, Dennis McDermott, and I'm being sarcastic here, really, didn't want to, engage in any international solidarity and try to, squash it. He was him and Shirley Carr, who was the previous president, anytime we tried to raise this, Cuba at the CLC, they tried to break it up. And, the effect of some of this was in the 40s in the International Woodworkers of America, which was, mostly Canadian, in many ways. There were huge red versus white fights, and a lot of the amazing leaders were kicked out. And that sort of created a huge chill. But I do think that we are in, we're in a new, a new moment, because I do think, with the loss of CEDA funding for a lot, I think that's changed it. I don't know what the CLC is going to do now, I know that they're very involved with the ILO and things like that, but I don't know what's going to happen. But also I think that international solidarity within unions right now is being constrained by the austerity agenda, by Harper's attacks, and things like that. And I do think that we need to figure out ways to get around it and to deal with it. So that's the end of my talk. I want to thank you sort of for listening to my rants. And unfortunately, I have to be out of here by 3:30 because I have to get on the bus and go to, to what I know it's shocking, but another center of the world for people from Toronto, which is Ottawa. So I know, but so but.